to know that like you can't keep doing the same things.
He kept his mouth completely shut to the press. Fast forward 12 months, and lenses finally captured him, unleashing his suppressed truth. The words spilled during that vulnerable moment shifted the entire narrative surrounding the bust. During the August 20th, 2025 broadcast of ESPN's Chiefs Kingdom, an intense 6-episode docuseries serving as a deep dive into the Kansas City football empire. The star quarterback planted himself in the hot seat to finally unpack a nightmare he had buried for over 12 months. The shocking arrest, the personal wreckage it caused, and the ultimate wake-up call it delivered to the older man.
I think just knowing that it hurt me woke him up to know that like you can't keep doing the same things.
I called him, right after, and I told him, I said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that it's taken away from your time and focus. I made a vow that he would never have to deal with anything.
Brittany Mahomes jumped into the conversation, noting that this specific disaster truly flipped a switch inside the older man's brain in a completely unprecedented way, purely because the eyes of his kids and grandkids were locked right on his mistakes. These 3 raw confessions from the quarterback, his father, and his wife form the absolute beating heart of this gripping saga. Yet, to truly grasp the heavy weight of those words, we have to rewind to the dark events of February 2024 that ignited this entire powder keg. On the 3rd of February, 2024, flashing red and blues pulled the older man to the shoulder of West Gentry Parkway down in Tyler, Texas. Right around 8:30 at night, cops peering into the ride spotted a popped brew almost instantly, and he went on to totally bomb the roadside balance checks. The breathalyzer results were disastrous, hitting 0.23, hovering at practically triple the hard legal boundary of 0.08. Thanks to a haunting rap sheet already stacked with previous drunk driving hits, the Lone Star State bumped this bust to a DWI 3 or more classification, a 3rd-degree felony threatening to lock him in a cage for 2 to 10 years alongside a brutal $10,000 financial penalty. The exact night of the cuffs clicking February 3rd, 2024. The kickoff for the ultimate championship clash, February 11th, 2024. A razor-thin window of 8 sunsets separated a criminal nightmare from the most crucial gridiron battle of the superstar's entire life. The red and gold squad was hunting down an elusive three-peat, a legendary feat untouched in the modern NFL era, with their star quarterback acting as the absolute engine of that run. Boasting a pair of championship rings at just 28 years of age, he was staring down the barrel of every single sports lens on the planet. Suddenly, his dad's booking photo exploded across the timelines, and vultures with microphones shoved it right in his face during media week before a single down was played. He showed up completely locked in on the San Francisco roster, but found himself dodging vicious bullets about a major crime instead. By February 6, 2024, he handed a frozen quote to Page 6, declaring it an in-house issue that would stay strictly behind closed doors. He insisted he was completely done talking about it, building a total fortress of silence before marching out and conquering the championship 8 days later. Meanwhile, the justice system churned at its own grueling pace. Formally indicting the older man in April 2024, a courtroom showdown was penciled in for August 27, 2024. But right as the opening gavels were about to drop, he threw in the towel and accepted a guilty plea inside Judge Carrie L. Russell's Smith County Hall, with his official punishment dropping on September 23, 2024. The judge handed down a solid 5 years of strict probation featuring suffocating oversight for the first 12 months, paired with 160 hours of sweat equity, mandatory DWI repeat, offender rehab, basic survival courses, weekly A meetings, and an absolute zero-tolerance ban on booze. They tacked on a hardcore 10-day stint behind local bars just for good measure. Kicking off right around the 21st of October, 2024, TMZ cameras were lurking in the bushes, grabbing raw video as he surrendered his freedom at the Smith County lockup to serve his time. A guy staring down the terrifying prospect of up to 10 years in a cage somehow coasted out with probation and a measly 10 days in local holding. That was the gavel drop. That was the fuel for the quarterback's emotions, that incredibly guarded public mask. contrasted with the bleeding emotion caught on tape 12 months later, forms the absolute foundation of this explosive narrative. It is a deep dive into the star's unfiltered truth and the massive ripple effects it caused. The most viral, intensely debated clip of the quarterback unpacking this trauma did not spawn from a stuffy podium, a tabloid quote, or a carefully curated tweet. It leaked from an incredibly intimate lens filming a documentary project he only signed off on after an eye-opening chat with Peyton Manning on CBS Mornings.
I talked to Peyton about it for a while, and I wanted to, I asked him would he do it, and he kind of had said, maybe not at the beginning of my career, but I think what stuck with me is he said, at the end of my career, I wish I would have done it so my kids could have seen what I was doing every day.
He was not trying to preach from a soapbox about the DWI disaster. His sole mission was to freeze frame his exact mindset and raw humanity during this incredibly turbulent chapter. The gut-wrenching dialogue about the jail trip only surfaced because the film crew was a fly on the wall for his entire life, catching the pure lightning that rehearsed media scrums completely missed. The monumental installment of The Chief's Kingdom that dropped on August 20th, 2025 on ESPN Plus delivered an intimate interview that quickly morphed into the most viral moment of the whole ordeal. The superstar quarterback painted a vivid picture of the sheer, crushing burden created by that exact moment. Having the charges drop a mere 8 days before the championship game twisted a profoundly personal household crisis into prime tabloid fodder, forcing him to dodge relentless media attacks right alongside standard inquiries regarding the 49ers' defensive scheme. Uttering the phrase, "Simply realizing it broke my heart," became the ultimate dividing line, elevating his raw grief miles above the endless courtroom chatter and societal arguments echoing around the scandal. The legendary athlete wasn't breaking down the judge's mandate like some political analyst dissecting new legislation. Nor was he offering a hot take on whether dodging jail time was a fitting punishment for racking up strike 3 in the criminal justice system. Instead, he spoke purely from the soul of a boy thrust under blinding stadium lights, forced to explain his dad's intoxicated escapades while simultaneously gearing up for the biggest football clash of his life. This damage bled from the heart, detached entirely from court proceedings. When the elder Mahomes reacted later in the broadcast, his words were heavy with the devastating gravity of that epiphany. The patriarch confessed that watching his own flesh and blood field humiliating inquiries on a global stage was the single most degrading experience he had ever endured. It wasn't the handcuffs, it wasn't the steel bars, nor was it the strict supervisory conditions, the humiliating tracking device strapped to his leg, or the mandatory volunteer shifts. It was the agonizing visual of his boy right at the summit of a legendary era, chasing down another ring in his absolute prime, trapped behind a microphone while the Globe's paparazzi interrogated him over a major crime. The television special additionally peeled back the curtain to reveal the genuine, unfiltered reality of their father and son dynamic behind closed doors.
He really enjoys watching his son play football and live out his dream.
For him to be there and supporting me, that's really cool because those moments are moments that you won't ever get again, and he's been there for all of them these last year.
Therein lies the sweeping emotional landscape of this saga. It features no drastic severing of family ties, nor does it contain any grand theatrical denouncements. There were no heavily sanitized press releases handed out by high-paid agents, just a wounded kid admitting his pain, and a remorseful parent picking up the phone to beg for forgiveness. Ultimately, it showcased a resilient clan that stubbornly continued to share bleacher seats and pass plates at supper, weathering the brutal storm together. His wife's poignant observation that the patriarch only truly snapped awake upon realizing his little ones and their babies were spectators to the chaos injected a profound ancestral weight that no courtroom lawyer could ever manufacture. Sterling, bronze, and golden. These three innocent toddlers will inevitably age into a digital world where they can replay the viral footage and scroll through the disastrous chronological archives, forced to process this dark blotch on their heritage using their own personal perspectives down the line. The matriarch pinpointed that exact terrifying reality as the singular weapon capable of shattering his stubborn shell. The justice bureaucracy failed, and the strict guidelines fell short. It took the innocent stares of grandbabies looking down from luxury boxes. Meanwhile, The 2025 football campaign unleashed an entirely separate nightmare upon the legendary signal caller. His body betrayed him with devastating ligament ruptures during Week 15 against Los Angeles. Instantly slamming the brakes on his gridiron dominance, the squad crashed to a dismal 6-11 record, sitting out the postseason tournament for the maiden voyage of his phenomenal reign. Yet, the doctors worked their magic under the knife, and physical therapy commenced without a single wasted second. By the time he faced the media gauntlet in January of 2026, his blazing tunnel vision was locked strictly on an epic comeback.
Yeah, first off, rehab's going great so far, just hitting all the checkpoints that the doctor wants you to do. And obviously, I think the long term, I want to be ready for week 1. Our doctor said that I could be. But for me, I think just having that goal in mind of trying to get better every day, that as well as having a great wife that is able to keep me involved with the kids. And
what remains unshakable about this phenomenal talent, whether he's absorbing blindside hits, agonizing physical trauma, domestic turmoil, or vicious tabloid ambushes, is his unnervingly stoic, aggressively forward-marching mentality. Process the agony behind closed doors. Command the stage with absolute poise. Never stop grinding. When the superstar finally unveiled his authentic feelings, venom was absent. He offered zero critiques regarding the judge's gavel. It merely boiled down to an exhausted air, declaring that watching his boy bleed emotionally was the bucket of ice water the older man needed. As for whether the lesson truly stuck, the ensuing sequence of events paints a starkly truthful portrait. So, what went down in 2026? The courtroom finale was hardly the final curtain call. The chaotic drama caught fire all over again, a full 24 months after its initial spark. That grueling 60-month supervisory sentence handed down back in September of 2024 arrived, dripping with uncompromising, suffocating mandates, absolute sobriety, intense surveillance for the opening 12 months, mandatory addiction meetings, forced civil labor, and a humiliating, high-tech tracking bracelet bolted to his shin, a relentless sobriety-checking contraption slapped onto him as a non-negotiable prerequisite just to earn out-of-state flight privileges and appease the relentless watchdogs. The humiliating leg iron wasn't part of the original kickoff package. Authorities forced it into the equation purely because glaring behavioral red flags began violently popping up midway through his rehabilitation window. Deep in the winter chill of 2025, the patriarch completely blew off a legally mandated toxicology screening, finally delivering his sample 24 hours past the February 11th deadline on the 12th, though the results miraculously came back clean. During that exact same chaotic calendar page, whispers erupted regarding a violent clash tied to a Louisiana excursion. A highly scrutinized getaway, the judge had green-lit so the older man could partake in championship weekend festivities. Legal paperwork eventually hinted that the entire explosive brawl might have been a completely fabricated theatrical stunt meant to drum up hype for a fistfight featuring former Major League hurler John Rocker. Yet, pushing aside all the fiery debates over whether the physical altercation was pure Hollywood fiction, an aggressive parole supervisor, teaming up with the lead prosecutor, viewed the messy circus as a massive liability, demanding the immediate installation of a persistent electronic shackle to significantly tighten the leash. The magistrate slammed the gavel in agreement, forcing the guilty party to foot the bill. Thus, as the curtain fell on 2025, the infamous father found himself tethered to aggressive, high-stakes criminal oversight. An inescapable electronic shackle remained strapped to his leg 24/7 to track every drop of liquor. He was trapped in a strict compliance matrix that had previously caught him skipping an exam and bending the rules during a trip. The legal grip choking his freedom had grown incredibly suffocating ever since the fall of 2024. Right as the clock struck January 1st, 2026, that relentless ankle bracelet allegedly screamed red, sensing a significant spike in booze. Whispers and documents suggested his sweat betrayed him, registering an illicit skin-level intoxication hovering right around 0.045. When a sweat-sensing tracker catches a spike like that, it instantly sets off blazing sirens deep inside the parole department's monitoring network. The wheels of justice spun with terrifying speed to issue a capture order. On February 3rd, 2026, an eerie 2-year anniversary of his 2024 drunk driving pullover. Authorities slapped the cuffs on the elder Mahomes during a routine check-in, throwing him straight into a Tyler jail cell where he languished for about 35 days. Chief Prosecutor Jacob Putman took to the mic, openly declaring that sneaking forbidden liquor was the direct catalyst for shattering his strict sobriety mandate. The chilling alignment of the calendar, striking on February 3rd across a 2-year gap, sent shivers down the spine of every single journalist watching this tragic saga unfold. It cast a hauntingly poetic shadow over his 2026 capture, painting a grim picture of history repeating itself. Identical jurisdiction, identical legal handcuffs, identical tragic figure, 2 trips around the sun later, practically down to the very minute, shattering the ironclad rules of a Lone Star State felony parole, especially a third-strike drunk driving rap backed by a mountain of prior offenses, threatens to obliterate a man's future entirely. Suddenly, the terrifying reality of ripping away his conditional freedom and locking him in a cage for the maximum term becomes a burning, immediate threat. This meant the elder statesman strolled into his March 9th courtroom showdown with a devastating 10-year penitentiary nightmare staring him right in the face. The gavel dropped on March 9th, 2026, under the watchful eye of Carrie L. Russell, the exact same magistrate who dealt his initial punishment. The bombshells dropped inside those courtroom walls instantly spun this chaotic tale in a wildly unexpected direction. A deep-dive strand analysis ordered for the trial returned absolutely spotless, revealing 0 trace of chronic drinking, while the accused vehemently denied touching a single drop. The ankle bracelet shrieked that he was drinking, yet the lab's rigorous strand analysis painted the picture of a completely sober man. These clashing realities violently collided at the defense table, transforming into the ultimate battleground for his entire legal fate. The prosecution dramatically shifted gears, submitting formal paperwork to yank their demand to lock him up entirely, refusing to let him off the hook completely, but rather tightening his invisible leash instead of destroying his freedom, a compromise the judge quickly greenlit. They tacked an agonizing 2 extra years onto his parole, dragging the grueling oversight out to 7 years total, and forcefully chained him to a mandatory 16-week rehab curriculum. The court tossed him a bone by counting the 30 excruciating days he had already rotted in a cell since February, perfectly wiping out the fresh 30-day lockup penalty. By nightfall, he was breathing free air again, a miraculous escape for a guy who had entered the building terrified of catching a 10-year bid. He strutted out hours later with nothing more than a stretched-out parole timeline and a non-negotiable therapy mandate. Social media exploded instantly, dripping with the identical furious venom seen back in 2024. Another elite superstar skating by. When does the leniency end? The fiery clash between the electronic ankle sensor and the flawless lab results ignited a fierce public war of words. Skeptics mercilessly interrogated the clash, wondering if a glitchy machine was to blame, or if it was simply the dark magic of an expensive lawyer leveraging a superstar quarterback's bloodline. Legal specialists have pointed out that these skin-reading bracelets are notoriously finicky, sometimes crying wolf, especially when the wearer accidentally rubs up against innocent, everyday culprits like germ-killing gels or harsh household bleaches. His fiercest supporters fired back, insisting the flimsy proof just was not strong enough to snatch a man's freedom away. Absolutely 0 confessions, completely pristine lab work, and a profound belief that forcing a 55-year-old dude to get help fights the real demons way better than burying him in a state penitentiary for a decade. The raging cultural firestorm never actually burned out. It simply rebooted to the exact same furious stalemate we witnessed following the 2024 verdict. The star quarterback completely ghosted the media, refusing to utter a single syllable regarding the March 9th courtroom drama. Fast forward to March 10th. 2026, the morning after the gavel fell and his icy, impenetrable silence held absolute, 0 microphone moments, 0 tweets. He fortified an emotional fortress around himself, turning his refusal to speak into a deafening roar of its own. So, by March 10th, 2026, the elder statesman remains locked in an agonizingly stretched-out legal purgatory, staring down a brutal 7-year timeline stemming from his 2024 conviction. carrying the heavy burden of a fresh 16-week rehab stint and an electronic leg cuff that the judge almost certainly kept strapped on after the March 9th showdown. While he has kept his nose totally clean since tasting freedom again on March 9th, there is a dark, undeniable past hovering over him that society absolutely refuses to look past. That shocking 2024 bust was hardly some random, unlucky lightning strike out of a clear blue sky. It was the explosive climax of a dangerous habit simmering in the shadows for decades, thrust into the blazing spotlight entirely because of his son's astronomical fame. Considering the old man already had a minimum of 2 drunk driving marks on his rap sheet well before 2024, deep dives into old judicial files and police blotters drag skeletons out of the closet that date all the way back to roughly 2008. Journalists aggressively digging through the archives ultimately unearthed a 2008 drunken driving scandal buried up in South Dakota. Back in 2016, authorities slapped him with a public drunkenness citation right during a Texas Tech football game where his kid was playing. Back then, hardly anyone batted an eye. The star quarterback hadn't become American royalty just yet. Before 2024 rolled around, the most significant red flag hit the books: a 2018 drunk driving bust down in Smith County, Texas. He took a plea deal, eating a 40-day lockup stretch that he chipped away at on weekends between roughly February 2019 and February 2020. That officially marked strike 2 on his record, pulling a completely typical penalty in the Lone Star State for driving under the influence without crashing into anyone. A mere slap on the wrist. He simply kept going. That exact detail is the crucial puzzle piece when you figure out how things spiraled entirely out of control. Every single brush with the law felt like a minor inconvenience. Do the weekend time, sit through the mandated courses, and head right back out the door. When a man is wrestling with a worsening addiction to the bottle, this toxic merry-go-round, break the rules, pay a tiny price, walk free, and do it again, never forces him to face his demons. It merely gives the destructive behavior room to breathe. By the time the district attorneys threw the book at him for that February 2024 traffic stop, they pointed straight at his rap sheet to justify bumping the charges up to a 3rd-degree felony, marking the absolute darkest legal territory he had ever crossed into. The courts were finally done giving him the benefit of the doubt. Looking back, the older Mahomes actually opened up about where the seeds of this crisis were truly planted. While appearing on the ESPN special called Chief's Kingdom, he shed light on how drinking heavily was essentially baked into his entire athletic career from day one. Speaking raw and unscripted for the cameras, he admitted, "I honestly never looked at my drinking as an actual issue. It was simply part of my routine. Basically, a mandatory side effect of the sport itself." That exact mindset was forged in the fires of an 11-year grind through Major League Baseball. He took the mound for a half-dozen organizations, slinging fastballs for the Minnesota Twins, Boston Red Sox, New York Mets, Texas Rangers, Chicago Cubs, and the Pittsburgh Pirates spanning 1992 through 2003, even tossing in a brief tour overseas playing for the Yokohama Bay Stars in Japan. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, the pro baseball locker room was an environment where throwing back a ridiculous amount of booze after the final pitch wasn't just accepted, it was practically a requirement that nobody questioned. He spent more than 10 years soaking in that exact toxic atmosphere during the crucial era that shaped him as a man. Once he hung up his cleats and settled down in Tyler, Texas, those fierce drinking routines followed him home. Except now he lacked the strict discipline of a grueling 162-game calendar, and he no longer had to worry about defending his job on the pitching staff every single morning. Walking away, his stats showed 42 victories, 39 defeats, a 5.47 earned run average, and 452 batters struck out across 709 innings and 308 games. He was the definition of a wandering hired gun. The guy constantly packed his bags, adjusting on the fly and hanging onto the sport well into his late 30s. Sweating it out in random, independent ballparks and minor league farm systems long after the big leagues had moved on. Living out of a suitcase with zero job security and an endless supply of post-game liquor forged a dangerous bond with booze, one he confessed he ignored until the damage was completely irreversible. The younger Mahomes directly connected those chaotic playing days to his dad's spiraling behavior during that deep dive on the Chiefs Kingdom special. The quarterback pointed out how his old man completely miscalculated the grip liquor had on his soul, primarily because he never failed to show up ready to play on the diamond, meaning the addiction never overtly torpedoed his livelihood. Herein, tricking him into believing everything was perfectly fine, the rot was spreading quietly on the inside. Whenever the law actually stepped in, the penalties were so incredibly weak that none of them served as a desperate wake-up call. You also have to factor in the absolute chaos surrounding the family leading up to that 2024 bust. His brother, Jackson, was dragged into a totally different legal nightmare unfolding at the exact same time. Severe allegations of aggravated sexual battery were pinned on Jackson back in 2023, triggered by a highly publicized altercation at a local dining spot that February. Eventually, prosecutors knocked those heavy accusations down to a simple misdemeanor plea deal in March 2024, handing him a 6-month probation stint, heavily packed with compulsory substance abuse and alcohol rehabilitation mandates. Legally speaking, that mess had zero connection to his father's drunk driving fiasco. Out in the court of public opinion, however, those two disastrous timelines bled together into one massive, ugly saga.
The media painted a relentless picture of a high-profile dynasty slowly unraveling at the seams. Even while securing championship rings, the star quarterback faced the relentless press, treating his brother's scandal with the identical, heavily guarded phrasing he reserved for his dad. Look, that's just a private family matter that I plan to keep entirely behind closed doors. Ultimately, I'm here to sling the football and do my best to provide for my people. He threw up that exact same impenetrable shield every single time someone shoved a microphone in his face. Yet, that documentary eventually pulled back the curtain, proving that behind his stoic armor, the crushing gravity of it all, his old man getting locked up, his siblings' courtroom drama, the relentless grilling from reporters, the intense societal spotlight, burning everyone sharing his last name, had been eating away at the quarterback, far deeper than his quick media dodges ever let on. The history, the endless string of rap sheets, an old-school environment that brushed off alcoholism, and a legendary surname caught in a blinding spotlight fueled by constant victories. All of that created the powder keg that made the judge's final ruling completely explode across the internet. When the hammer finally dropped, the explosive outrage from fans was entirely fueled by years of buried tension breaking out into the open. People were losing their minds over it. The punishment handed down is the absolute beating heart of this entire saga. All the other details, the generational trauma, the bizarre timing, the son's perfectly calculated silence, acted as gasoline for the massive firestorm set off by a single word: probation. The former big leaguer was staring down the barrel of a devastating third-degree felony in the state of Texas. For a crime of that magnitude, the law threatens anywhere from 2 to 10 years behind bars in a state penitentiary, paired with a massive financial hit, maxing out at $10,000. The man's rap sheet already showed previous drunk driving charges. When cops pulled him over, his blood alcohol level sat at a staggering point, 2.3, falling just short of triple the state's legal ceiling. Even before officers administered a single sobriety check, a cracked open brew sat in plain sight right inside the ride. A judge handed down his fate on September 23rd, 2024, 5 years of probation, featuring extremely tight monitoring right out of the gate for those first 12 months. The mandate also slapped him with 160 hours of public service, mandatory enrollment in a habitual drunk driver clinic, life management training, Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and a strict ban on any booze whatsoever. The court tossed an extra 10-day stint at the local lockup on top of everything, a penalty he wrapped up toward the tail end of October 2024. He dodged the penitentiary, completely zero long-term incarceration. Instead, he snagged a cushy plea bargain, heavily relying on neighborhood initiatives and ankle bracelets, sparking an instant, deafening uproar from the masses. The internet absolutely exploded, with practically everyone hyperfixated on a single burning theory. The legendary quarterback's dad walked away with a slap on the wrist, purely off the strength of his superstar kid's reputation. If you scrolled through any message board or thread, one brutal, recurring sentiment dominated the chatter. The sheer arrogance of it all is just mind-blowing. Leaked dashcam footage captured by the tabloids during that initial 2024 bust allegedly caught the elder Mahomes shamelessly name-dropping his MVP offspring while talking to the cops. Spectators fiercely insisted this was a blatant maneuver to weaponize his boy's celebrity status to wiggle out of a tight legal jam. That exact split second anchored the entire narrative of unearned privilege. It painted a vivid, unforgettable picture that fueled the widespread fury. People weren't just mad about the lenient penalty. They were furious at the sight of a grown man desperately wielding his kid's identity like a bulletproof vest the second the steel bracelets appeared. In the days following his entry into that 10-day lockup, the digital atmosphere boiled over. The overarching consensus was crystal clear: this entire bloodline is completely out of touch with reality. Commenters raged about the astronomical levels of audacity, lamenting how terrible it looked for a brother and a dad to actively drag such an iconic legacy through the mud. But the loudest echo across every app was identical. "I feel terrible for Patrick. He didn't choose to have a deadbeat for a father." That specific brand of pity perfectly highlighted the massive divide driving the cultural conversation. In one corner, furious critics swore this verdict was bought and paid for by fame. They argued that any ordinary Joe with the exact same criminal past, the identical, astronomical blood alcohol numbers, that same half-empty cold one in the cup holder, and a third-strike felony on his rap sheet would have been tossed into a concrete cell without hesitation. Meanwhile, the opposing camp defended the outcome, pointing out that the Lone Star State routinely grants probation for drunk driving felonies where nobody actually gets hurt. They maintain that these types of plea bargains happen every single day, no matter who your family is. They pointed to the strict surveillance, the forced treatment, the grueling volunteer hours, and the stint behind bars as genuine punishment, insisting that dragging the star quarterback's influence into the mix was just a wild, baseless conspiracy theory. The defendant's legal counsel, Joe Murphy, heavily leaned on his client's claim of hitting the half-year mark entirely clean and sober. The lawyer also highlighted the father's profound apologies to justify the gentle plea agreement. Ultimately, the defense team painted a picture of a man desperately trying to heal, rather than a criminal needing a cage. While that redemption angle might fly in a Southern courtroom for a rookie mistake, the masses weren't buying it for a guy on his third strike. Plus, the chronological sequence of events just poured gasoline on the raging fire. Right around August 2024, just a handful of weeks before he had to surrender for his 10-day incarceration, the elder Mahomes fired off an Instagram update cheering his 6-month sobriety milestone and pouring out love for his relatives. A tiny window later, he was turning himself in at the local precinct. The haters absolutely feasted on that timeline. They shredded the inspirational social media post as a fake PR stunt, a carefully crafted illusion completely shattered by the gritty tabloid video of his booking. Visually, it was a public relations nightmare. Brag about getting clean, march straight into a holding cell, and stroll back out to freedom 10 days later. Yet, buried underneath the massive wave of societal anger, debates about extreme wealth, and cries of injustice, lay a heartbreaking reality, something the latest documentary special laid bare far better than any courtroom transcript. How did this disaster genuinely impact the superstar? The truth was agonizingly simple. It tore him apart. The sheer agony of the father realizing that pain, listening to it, absorbing it, being crushed by the guilt of it became the ultimate, agonizing punishment in the older man's eyes. It wasn't the cold cell, the strict check-ins, or the heavy electronic shackle. The true penalty was picking up the receiver to face his boy. Right after watching him field brutal press questions about a drunk driving scandal under the blinding lights of the NFL's grandest spectacle, the massive chasm between the incredibly light court ruling everyone dragged online and the quiet, devastating hell the family endured behind closed doors is exactly why that documentary footage went incredibly viral. Viewers initially tuned in, hoping to catch some fiery venting over the judge's controversial gavel strike. Instead, they walked into a raw, emotional reckoning between two men, wrestling with generational ghosts far darker and more profound than a simple late-night pullover on West Gentry Parkway. That so-called sweetheart deal always carried a brutal double meaning from the jump. On the surface, it was a judicial slap on the wrist that left millions screaming about a rigged justice system. But underneath the paperwork, it was a silent, devastating familial curse playing out in real time. It was a lifetime of hidden demons violently shoved into the national spotlight. A heartbroken kid forced to defend his old man's reckless mistakes during the single most broadcasted athletic event on the globe. A tearful grandpa promising to do better on national television, swearing an oath to the three young kids peering down from the VIP box. As for whether that tearful promise actually held up, his subsequent 2026 arrest hands you the brutally honest truth.